Hello, friends. September 11th was such a powerful day in my life, both as a resident of New York City and especially as a musician living in that city. I was grasping at how to celebrate the 20th anniversary this year, realizing that celebrate isn't really quite the right word. I thought about maybe getting some friends together in the backyard over a fire or aspiring for some sort of community gathering, but it's not really the time for a party of any sort, is it? And then Allison reached out to me and asked if I would be willing to acknowledge the 20th anniversary of that event by reading a talk that I wrote for parents of the incoming class at the Boston Conservatory in the fall of 2003. I was a very new director of the school at that point, and up until that time it had always been challenging to say to parents, yes, you should send your child to music school and pay a lot of tuition for a career that is anything but guaranteed because, and prior to 9/11, my voice would trail off a little bit after the because it wasn't clear to me yet that music is life and death, that we sing for each other when we are dying, we sing every time we celebrate a birthday, we sing, in fact, with the very first breath we take. The doctors say the baby is crying, but I say that we are using rhythm and pitch to express existence, and we have a word for using rhythm and pitch to express existence. Babies are singing. Babies are making music. So thank you, Allison, for asking me to read this piece again, to remember and to commemorate what happened 20 years ago, a terrible thing that happened, but like many terrible things, something that made life very clear to me, and in particular made music very clear to me. Here it is. One of my parents' deepest fears, I suspect, is that society would not properly value me as a musician, that I wouldn't be appreciated. I had very good grades in high school. I was good in science and math, and they imagined that as a doctor or a research chemist or an engineer, maybe I would be more appreciated than I was as a musician. I still remember my mother's remark when I announced my decision to apply to music schools. She said, "You're wasting your SAT scores." On some level, I think my parents were not sure themselves what the value of music was what its purpose was, and they loved music. They listened to music all the time. They just weren't really clear about its function. So let me talk about that a little bit, because we live in a society that puts music in the arts and entertainment section of the newspaper, and serious music, the kind your students are about to engage in, has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with entertainment. In fact, it's the opposite of entertainment. Let me talk a little bit about music and how it works. One of the first cultures to articulate how music really works were the ancient Greeks, and this will fascinate you. The Greeks said that music and astronomy are two sides of the same coin. Astronomy is the study of relationships between observable, permanent, external objects. Music is the study of relationships between invisible, internal, hidden objects. Music has a way of finding big, invisible, moving pieces inside our hearts and souls and helping us figure out the position of things inside of us. Let me give you some examples of how this works. One of the most profound musical compositions of all time is the Quartet for the End of Time, written by the French composer Olivier Messiaen in 1940. Messiaen was 31 years old when France entered the war against Nazi Germany. He was captured by the Germans in June of 1940 and imprisoned in a prisoner of war camp. He was fortunate to find sympathetic prison guards who gave him a paper and place to compose, and fortunate to have musician colleagues in the camp, a cellist, a violinist, and a clarinetist. Messiaen wrote his quartet with these specific players in mind. It was performed in January 1941 for 4,000 prisoners and guards in the prison camp. Today it is one of the famous masterworks in the repertoire. Given what we have since learned about life in Nazi camps, why would anyone in his right mind waste time and energy writing or playing music? There was barely enough energy on a good day to find food and water, avoid a beating, stay warm, or escape torture. Why would anyone bother with music? And yet, even from concentration camps, we have poetry, we have music, we have visual art. It wasn't just this one fanatic, Messiaen. Many, many people created art. Why? Well, in a place where people are focused on survival, on the bare necessities, the obvious conclusion is that art must be somehow essential for life. Camps were without money, without hope, without commerce, without recreation, without basic respect, but they were not without art. Art is part of human survival. Art is part of the human spirit, an unquenchable expression of who we are. Art is one of the ways in which we say, I am alive and my life has meaning. In September of 2001, I was a resident of Manhattan, and on the morning of September 12th, 2001, I reached a new understanding of my art and its relationship to the world. Because I sat down at the piano that morning at 10 a.m. to practice, as was my daily routine. I did it by habit, without thinking about it. I lifted the cover on the keyboard, I opened my music, put my hands on the keys, and I took my hands off the keys. And I sat and thought, does this matter? Isn't this completely irrelevant? Playing the piano right now, given what happened in this city yesterday, seems silly, absurd, irreverent, pointless. Why am I here? What place has a musician in this moment in time? Who needs a piano player right now? I felt lost. And then I, along with the rest of New York City, went through the journey of getting through that week. I did not play the piano that day, and in fact, I contemplated briefly whether I would ever want to play the piano again. And then I saw how we got through the day. At least in my neighborhood, we didn't shoot hoops or play Scrabble. We didn't play cards to pass the time. We didn't watch TV. We didn't shop. We did not go to the mall. The first organized activity I saw in New York on the very evening of September 11th was singing. People sang. People sang around firehouses. People sang, "We Shall Overcome." Lots of people sang, "America the Beautiful." The first organized public event, I remember, was the Brahms Requiem later that week at Lincoln Center with the New York Philharmonic. The first organized public expression of grief, our first communal response to that event, was a concert. That was the beginning of a sense that our life might go on. The U.S. military may have secured the airspace, but recovery was led by the arts and by music in particular, beginning with that very night. From these two experiences, I have come to understand that music is not part of arts and entertainment, as the newspaper section would have us believe. It is not a luxury, a lavish thing we fund from leftovers of budgets, not a plaything or an amusement or pastime. Music is a basic need of human survival. Music is one of the ways we make sense of our lives, one of the ways we express feelings when we have no words. It is a way for us to understand things with our heart when we cannot with our mind. Some of you may know Samuel Barber's heart-wrenchingly beautiful piece, Adagio for Strings. And if you don't know it by that name, then some of you may know it as the background music for the Oliver Stone movie Platoon, a film about the Vietnam War. And if you know that piece of music either way, you know it has the ability to crack your heart open like a walnut. It can make you cry over sadness you didn't even know you had. Music can slip beneath our conscious reality to get at what's really going on inside of us the way a good therapist does. Very few of you have been to a wedding where there was no music. There might have been a little music, there might have been some really bad music, but with few exceptions, there's some music. And something very predictable happens at weddings. People get pent up with all kinds of emotion, and then there's some musical moment where the action of the wedding stops and someone sings or plays the flute or something. And even if the music is terrible, even if the quality isn't good, predictably, 30 or 40% of people who are going to cry at a wedding cry a couple of moments after the music starts. Why is that? The Greeks. Music allows us to move those big, invisible pieces of ourselves and rearrange our insides so that we can express what we feel even when we can't talk about it. Can you imagine watching Indiana Jones or Superman or Star Wars with the dialogue but no music? What is it about the music swelling up at just the right moment in E.T. so that all the softies in the audience start crying at exactly the same moment? I guarantee you if you showed the movie with the music stripped out, it wouldn't happen that way. The Greeks. Music is the understanding of the relationship between invisible internal objects. And I'll give you one more example, the story of the most important concert of my life. I must tell you, I've played a little less than 1,000 concerts in my life so far. I have played in places I thought were important. I liked playing in Carnegie Hall. I enjoyed playing in Paris. It made me happy to please critics in St. Petersburg. I have played for people I thought were very important, music critics of newspapers, foreign heads of state. But the most important concert of my entire life took place in a nursing home in a small town a few years ago. I was playing with a very dear friend of mine who's a violinist. We began, as we often do, with Aaron Copland's sonata, which was written during World War II and dedicated to a young friend of Copland's, a young pilot who was shot down during the war. Now, we often talk to our audiences about the pieces we are going to play rather than providing them with written notes. But in this case, because we began the concert with this piece, we decided to talk about it later in the program and to just come out and play the music without explanation. Midway through the piece, an elderly man seated in a wheelchair near the front of the hall began to weep. And this man, who I later met, was clearly a soldier. Even in his 70s, it was clear from his buzz-cut hair, square jaw, and general demeanor that he had spent a good deal of his life in the military. And I thought it a bit odd that somebody would be moved to tears by that particular movement of that particular piece, but it wasn't the first time I've heard crying in a concert, and we went on with the concert and finished the piece. When we came out to play the next piece on the program, we decided to talk about both the first and second pieces, and we described the circumstances in which the Copland was written, and we mentioned its dedication to a downed pilot. The man in the front of the audience became so disturbed that he had to leave the auditorium, and I honestly figured that we would not see him again. But he did come backstage afterwards, tears and all, to explain himself. And what he told us was this: during World War II, I was a pilot, and I was in an aerial combat situation where one of my team's planes was hit. I watched my friend bail out, and we watched his parachute open, but the Japanese planes which had engaged us returned, and they machine-gunned across the parachute cords so as to separate the parachute from the pilot. And I watched my friend drop away into the ocean, realizing that he was lost. I have not thought about this for many years now, but during that first piece of music you played, this memory returned to me so vividly that it was as though I was reliving it. I didn't understand why this was happening, why now. But then when you came out to explain that this piece of music was written to commemorate a lost pilot, it was a bit more than I could handle. How does music do that? How does it find those feelings and memories in me? Remember the Greeks. Music is the study of invisible relationships between internal objects. The concert in the nursing home was the most important work I have ever done. For me to play for that old soldier and help him connect somehow with Aaron Copland, and to connect their memories of their lost friends, to help him remember and mourn his friend. That is my work. That is why music matters. What follows is a part of the talk I will give to this year's freshman class when I welcome them a few days from now. The responsibility I will charge your sons and daughters with is this: if we were a medical school and you were here as a medical student practicing appendectomies, you would take your work very seriously, because you would imagine that some night at 2 a.m., someone is going to waltz into your emergency room and you're going to have to save their life. Well, my friends, someday at 8 p.m., somebody is going to walk into your concert hall and bring you a mind that is confused, a heart that is overwhelmed, and a soul that is weary. And whether they go out whole again will depend partly on how well you do your craft. You're not here to become an entertainer. You don't have to sell yourself. The truth is, you don't have anything to sell. Being a musician is not about dispensing a product like selling used cars. I am not an entertainer. I'm a lot closer to a paramedic, a firefighter, or a rescue worker. You are here to become a sort of therapist for the human soul, a spiritual version of a chiropractor, physical therapist, someone who works with our insides to see if they can get things to line up, to see if we can come into harmony with ourselves and be healthy and happy and well. Frankly, ladies and gentlemen, I expect you not only to master music, I expect you to save the planet. If there is a future wave of wellness on this planet, of harmony, of peace, of an end to war, of mutual understanding, of equality, fairness, I don't expect it will come from a government, a military force, or a corporation. I no longer even expect it to come from the religions of the world, which together seem to have brought us as much war as they have peace. If there is a future of peace for humankind, if there is to be an understanding of how our invisible internal things should fit together, I expect It will come from the artists, because that's what we do. As in the concentration camps and the evening of 9/11, the artists are the ones who might be able to help us with our internal, invisible lives.